What if the survival of an entire nation depended on secrets buried deep beneath the streets you walk every day? A hidden vault, a vanished leader, and a countdown that could change everything. Commander Elias Ward must confront betrayal, mystery, and the shadows of a past that refuses to stay buried. Every second brings him closer to a truth that could save or destroy America. Do you dare to uncover the leadership code? The sky over Washington carried a heavy shade of gray, the kind that settled over the city like a warning. Cold air moved through the empty streets, brushing against abandoned newspaper stands that still held yesterday's headlines. People whispered in corners, their voices thin and brittle, as if the nation itself was holding its breath. Inside the secure chamber beneath the Capitol, Commander Elias Ward stood with his hands pressed firmly against the steel table. His pulse throbbed against the base of his throat, yet his eyes remained steady, fixed on the holographic map flickering before him. Red markers glowed across the nation's borders, each one a signal of pressure, conflict, or betrayal. He inhaled slowly, tasting the metallic scent of fear that clung to the room. The silence was broken only by the soft hum of servers. Behind Elias, the advisors took their seats, but none dared speak first. They watched him closely, waiting for the kind of clarity that only he had managed to provide during the darkest months. Elias felt the weight of their expectations settle across his shoulders. He remembered the first time he had faced this room, a young officer trying to hide trembling hands behind rigid discipline. Now, the tremors were gone, replaced by a deeper ache born of responsibility and the knowledge that every command would shape the fate of millions. He raised his head as the door slid open. Director Mara Keswick approached, her steps measured, her expression carved from steel. Her presence always shifted the air, as if she carried storms inside her that never fully broke. She set a single folder in front of him, its corners bent from the pressure of her grip. "Elias," she said, her voice low but firm, "this is what we've been trying to verify for weeks." Her tone held no tremor, yet her eyes revealed a quiet urgency. He opened the folder and found a series of encrypted communications, each stamped with the insignia of a long-dismantled program. He felt a chill crawl up his spine. The program was not supposed to exist anymore. The last administration had buried it in silence, sealing it away like a secret shame. But the symbols were unmistakable, marked with the same coded signature once used for covert leadership operations designed to manipulate global alliances. Elias ran his thumb across the page, absorbing each detail. The paper felt rough, almost gritty, as if the truth inside it had corroded the surface. He lifted his gaze back to Mara, whose jaw tightened as she waited for his reaction. "These messages indicate that someone reopened the program without authorization," she said. Her fingers clasped together on the table, knuckles paling as she leaned forward. "Someone who knows the original framework. Someone inside our circle." Elias felt his heartbeat slow, not from calm, but from the gravity of what she had implied. A betrayal at this level would unravel every defense system they had rebuilt. It would expose the nation's fractures to those already circling like predators along the borders. He closed the folder gently, treating it as if it were an unstable explosive. The room seemed smaller now, pressing in around them. He could sense the advisors' unease growing, the way their shoulders stiffened and their eyes flicked between him and the sealed information. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Elias asked. His voice was steady, but something old and unresolved stirred beneath it. Mara hesitated before answering, and that hesitation told him everything. "There's a name buried in those codes," she replied. "A name that should have remained impossible." A faint chill ran down Elias's arms, raising the hair on his skin. He felt an unexpected heaviness settle in his chest, as if the past had reached forward and closed its hand around him. He braced himself, though he was not sure for what. Mara slid a final sheet toward him. Her eyes did not leave his face as he read the decrypted signature at the bottom. His breath tightened, and for a moment the hum of the room faded into silence. The signature belonged to someone he once trusted more than anyone, someone whose disappearance had never been fully explained, someone who knew every strength and every fracture inside America's leadership infrastructure. Elias lifted his eyes from the page, and the room seemed to tilt with the weight of recognition. Something long buried had returned to the surface, and the truth pressed against him like a force determined to break through. The advisors waited, uncertain and tense. Mara watched him closely, sensing the shift in his expression. Elias steadied himself, struggling to contain the rising storm inside him. For the first time in years, he felt the fragile line between duty and memory begin to blur. He opened his mouth to speak, but the chamber lights flickered sharply, bathing the room in a cold, sudden flash. A warning signal pulsed from the wall console. Its steady rhythm echoed across the chamber, slow and relentless. Something significant had breached their perimeter. Elias turned toward the alert, his pulse quickening. Whatever had begun was no longer contained in ink or code. It was already moving, already unfolding, already changing the shape of the crisis they thought they understood. He stepped toward the console, the echo of his footsteps cutting through the charged silence. The advisors rose behind him, fear sharpening the air once more. When the screen loaded the incoming transmission, Elias felt a familiar dread take hold of his chest. The voice on the other end spoke a single sentence that froze him where he stood. A sentence only one person from his past would ever dare to send. And with that single message, the secrets behind America's survival began to unravel in ways none of them were prepared to face. The chamber fell into a dense and uneasy stillness. Elias stared at the transmission screen, feeling the room's temperature drop as if a shadow had slipped through an unseen doorway. The voice that emerged carried a calm certainty, the kind that belonged to someone who had once stood beside him during the most volatile missions of their youth. Elias Ward. The message began, each word measured with unsettling precision. You were never meant to lead alone. The audio cut abruptly, leaving an echo that seemed to cling to the walls. Elias felt the breath gather tight in his chest. The voice belonged to Adrian Locke, the man who had vanished without a trace 8 years earlier during a classified operation that tore a hole through the foundations of America's intelligence network. Adrian had been brilliant, decisive, and unbreakable. He had also been the only person Elias had ever trusted with the deepest strategies of the leadership code. His disappearance had fractured not only the command structure but Elias himself, leaving questions that no investigation had ever been able to answer. Mara stepped closer, her voice quiet, yet edged with a tension she could not disguise. This transmission went through encrypted layers that only the founders of the program had access to, she said. Adrian is either alive, or someone has replicated his exact signature. Elias knew replication was impossible. The coding required connection to biometric data stored in a vault that only 3 individuals had ever accessed. He felt the truth tightening its grip around him like a cold hand, pulling him backward into memories he had fought to restrain. He could still see Adrian standing beneath the floodlights of their last shared operation, the steady gaze, the silent confidence, and the unspoken warning that something inside the agency had begun to rot. A tremor of unease rippled across the advisors' faces. Questions surged around them, yet no one dared voice the one that mattered most. What was Adrian trying to warn them about now? Elias straightened slowly, his posture sharpening as he forced his mind back into the present. Trace that transmission's point of origin, he said. His tone was firm, but Mara caught the faint strain at the edges, a rare fracture in a man known for unshakable composure. The holographic map reactivated, threads of blue lines racing across the digital grid as the system tracked the signal. The lines wove a complex pattern, crossing continents, bouncing off obscure satellites, diving through encrypted tunnels that made the trail almost impossible to follow. Almost. A single point flickered into focus at the edge of the map. Not a foreign threat, not a rogue nation, but a location far more unsettling. A forgotten American facility buried beneath layers of classified history. One that had been shut down after Adrian's disappearance. One that Elias had sworn he would never revisit. The Helios Vault, a place built for leadership simulations, psychological conditioning, and scenarios too dangerous to ever be publicly acknowledged. A place designed to test loyalty, fear, and the limits of power itself. As the name pulsed on the screen, Elias felt a tightening within his gut. He could almost smell the metallic corridors of the vault, almost hear the echoes of distant alarms and the footsteps of operatives who never made it out. Mara's voice softened, but her eyes remained locked on him. If Adrian is inside Helios, then everything we thought we buried has resurfaced. The advisors murmur among themselves, unease spreading like a cold draft. Some lean back in disbelief. Others lean forward, searching Elias's face for answers he could not yet give. He felt memories coil at the base of his spine, threatening to pull him under. Memories of coded orders whispered in dim corridors. Memories of Adrian's final glance before disappearing into the depths of an operation that had been classified as a national erasure. Elias turned away from the table and paced slowly toward the reinforced window. Outside, the Capitol dome glowed beneath the storm-thickened sky. Lightning etched thin scars across the clouds, revealing the trembling edge of a nation desperately dependent on the decisions he would make within the next few hours. The pressure pressed against him, familiar yet heavier than before. The survival of America was no longer a battle fought across borders or security networks. It had just become personal. Mara approached him but kept a respectful distance. Her voice held a steady resolve, though she could sense the internal battle he fought. We cannot move blindly, Elias. Helios is unstable. It was designed for psychological warfare. If Adrian is controlling it, there is no telling what he intends. He turned toward her, jaw tightening as he fought to anchor himself. He would not reach out unless the threat was greater than any of us understand. His words hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. The kind of truth no one wanted to confront. Mara searched his face, sensing more than she wished to reveal. You once said Adrian believed the real collapse of a nation begins from within. If he is activating Helios, he may be trying to prove that the fractures inside our leadership are deeper than any external enemy. Elias felt a slow burn rise in his chest. Not anger, recognition. A recognition he had tried for years to silence. The holographic map flickered again. The lights dimmed. All systems synced to the same message, suddenly transmitted across the chamber. A countdown appeared. Its numbers glowed with a cold, unrelenting clarity. 48 hours. No description. No threat. No explanation. Just time. Elias stared at the countdown, feeling the chamber tilt in a way that made the edges of his vision tighten. He sensed it now, the shift he had feared for years. The moment when the past reached forward and seized the present. Mara whispered, almost breathless, "What has he started?" Elias did not answer. His mind was already racing through strategies, through buried codes, through every possible consequence. But one thought rose above the chaos. A truth that struck with sharp, unforgiving certainty. Adrian was not warning them. He was leading them into something far more complex. Something only the two of them had ever fully understood. The countdown dropped another number, glowing brighter, colder, more deliberate. Elias felt the weight of realization settle into his chest. If the leadership code had been reactivated, then the secrets behind America's survival were no longer secrets at all. They were already in motion, and what would rise from them was something no one in the room was prepared to face. The countdown on the screen pulsed like a heartbeat, relentless and unyielding. Each second carried the weight of consequences Elias could not yet name. The room felt impossibly small now, compressed by the invisible pressure of expectation and impending revelation. Elias stepped closer to the console, his hand hovering over the controls without touching them. He could feel every microsecond, every flicker of energy in the system, as though the vault itself were breathing beneath the city. Outside, the storm raged, lightning etching jagged scars across the sky, thunder rolling like distant artillery. Mara's voice broke through the tension, low and deliberate. We cannot rush blindly. Helios is designed to manipulate, to provoke. One wrong move and the entire operation collapses. She leaned in, eyes sharp as flint. You know the stakes better than anyone. You know what he is capable of. Elias did know. He remembered the labyrinthine corridors of Helios, the cold walls that seemed to absorb sound, the surveillance that felt alive, watching and waiting. He remembered the tests Adrian had imposed, the simulations that forced them to confront fears they did not even realize they carried. And he remembered Adrian's words the night before he vanished. Only when you face the edge do you understand the weight of leadership. The room went silent again. Even the advisor seemed frozen, as if the air itself had thickened with anticipation. Elias turned to Mara. "Give me the full operational files of Helios," he said. "Everything from the inception, every simulation, every code sequence, every decision matrix." Her fingers flew across the console, retrieving data buried under layers of encryption that had remained untouched for years. As the files opened, the room filled with a faint glow of holographic projections, each a window into the hidden architecture of the vault. Graphs, flowcharts, encrypted simulations of crises, military strategies, psychological conditioning exercises, all designed to test the resilience of leadership under extreme pressure. Elias's eyes traced the lines, absorbing the magnitude of what Adrian had orchestrated. Helios was more than a vault. It was a living system, a complex network capable of predicting decisions, manipulating outcomes, and shaping leaders themselves. He realized then that Adrian's message was not a warning. It was an invitation, a challenge. The advisors shifted uneasily, sensing the weight of the revelation. Elias turned back to the holographic display, fingers hovering over a sequence marked with symbol that only he and Adrian could recognize. A simulation titled Threshold of Collapse. He felt a tremor in his chest, the familiar knot of anticipation and dread. This simulation had been designed for one purpose: to expose the cracks within leadership, to show where the nation was most vulnerable. And now it had been activated again. Mara leaned closer. "What happens if it goes live?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elias did not answer immediately. He could feel the pulse of the system beneath the city, a silent rhythm that seemed to anticipate their every thought. He could see the threads of strategy, the intricate web of contingency plans, all converging toward a point he could not yet fully understand. Then, without warning, a new message appeared on the screen. No words, no voice, just an image. It was a photograph of a location deep within Helios, a chamber sealed for decades. The angle was precise, almost intimate, showing a console glowing faintly in the darkness, symbols scrolling across the screen in a language only Elias recognized. He felt the air tighten around him, the room shrinking further. The advisors exchanged glances, a silent question in each pair of eyes. But Elias's attention remained fixed on the image. He could see it clearly. The chamber, the console, the code. It was not just a place. It was the epicenter, the heart of Helios. And someone or something was already inside. Mara's hand hovered over his shoulder, cautious, hesitant. "Elias," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "If Adrian is there, if he is running this, then we are not merely observers. We are players." Elias swallowed, feeling the tight coil of tension in his gut. He wanted to move, to act, to confront the unknown threat. But he also knew that rushing forward would play into the design Adrian had set in motion years ago. The countdown continued, each number flashing with relentless precision. 47 hours. 46. 45. The seconds stretched, and with them, the weight of inevitability. Every heartbeat, every breath seemed magnified, echoing in the steel-walled chamber. Then, just as Elias reached toward the console, the room was plunged into darkness. The holographic projections flickered and died, leaving only the storm outside to illuminate the chamber in flashes of cold, electric white. A soft, almost imperceptible hum began to fill the air. It was not the servers. It was something else, something alive. Elias stepped back, senses sharpening. The advisors froze, their faces pale in the intermittent light. The countdown continued, untouched. The system waited, and the world beyond the chamber seemed to hold its breath. Elias's mind raced. He could feel the weight of Adrian's presence, even without seeing him. He knew that the next move, the next revelation, would change everything. And yet, despite the tension, despite the storm, despite the pulse of inevitability, nothing happened. The room remained suspended in silence, the hum persistent, the countdown ticking steadily forward. 44 hours. Elias's jaw tightened. He could almost feel Adrian's gaze, somewhere deep within Helios, waiting for him to make the first move. And Elias knew, with cold certainty, that whatever came next would demand everything he had ever learned about leadership trust, and survival. The chamber waited. The storm waited. The countdown waited. And the audience waited just as the seconds stretched, unwilling to yield the answers that hung tantalizingly out of reach. The leadership code had begun, but the truth, the full, devastating truth, had not yet revealed itself. The storm outside had softened to a steady rain, the kind that slicked streets and blurred the edges of city. Inside the chamber, the hum of Helios had slowed, a low, rhythmic pulse that seemed almost alive. Elias stood at the console, eyes fixed on the countdown, now creeping closer to its final hours. The tension in the room had shifted. It was no longer panic, no longer fear. It was calculation, measured and deliberate. Mara's voice broke the silence. "We have the files. Elias. We know the contingencies. We can counter whatever Adrian is attempting." Elias nodded slowly. The words carried weight, but he did not feel relief. Relief was a luxury leaders rarely earned. Instead, he felt clarity. The chamber's lights flickered, and for a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Then the console blinked once, twice, and the final encrypted message from Adrian appeared. "I trust you will see this through." It read, "No threat, no demand, just those 7 words." And beneath them, a simple line of code: "Survival is not obedience. It is understanding." Elias exhaled slowly, allowing the words to settle into him. He realized now what Adrian had been testing all along. It was never about control. It was never about fear. It was about the resilience of leadership itself, the ability to adapt, to recognize the cracks, and act decisively when every option seemed impossible. He looked around the room. The advisors, tense and uncertain only hours ago, now moved with quiet confidence. They had been part of the test too, whether they realized it or not. And in this room, beneath the Capitol, they had passed. Elias turned his gaze back to the holographic map. The red markers had not vanished. The crises still existed. But the nation's survival was no longer a question of blind reaction. It was a question of insight, unity, and the courage to confront truths hidden for too long. Mara stepped beside him. "Will he return?" she asked quietly. Elias shook his head, but not in defeat. Adrian taught us that leadership is not about waiting for the answer to arrive. It is about creating the solution from what we have, here and now. The storm outside began to wane, the first light of dawn stretching thin beams across the Capitol dome. Elias felt the weight on his shoulders ease slightly, though the path ahead remained uncertain. Helios had tested them, shaken them, and revealed vulnerabilities that could have shattered the nation. Yet in that revelation, a new strength emerged. He placed a hand on the console, watching as the countdown finally reached 0. Nothing exploded. No catastrophe. Only silence. Only understanding. The room seemed to exhale with him, the tension giving way to resolve. America had faced its hidden trial, and for the first time in years, Elias allowed himself a measured sense of hope. He turned to the team, meeting their eyes with a steady gaze. "This is only the beginning," he said. "But we now know what it takes to survive, to lead, and to protect what matters most." The doors of the chamber opened, letting in the pale light of morning. Outside, the world moved on, unaware of the test that had taken place in the shadows beneath their feet. But Elias knew, and he knew that the true work of leadership, of safeguarding a nation, was never finished. He stepped forward, leaving Helios behind, yet carrying its lessons with him. The leadership code remained, not as a secret to wield, but as a guide to endure. And as the sun rose over the city, Elias Ward understood the deepest truth Adrian had ever tried to teach him. Survival was never guaranteed, but those who understood the cost of leadership could bend the storm without breaking. The chapter closed, but the story of resilience, courage, and vigilance would continue, quietly shaping the future in ways the world could never fully see.